Welcome back into the Lions247 Podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. Happy to be with you once again. We got our first episode of 2 for the week, and we're relatively fresh off the camp circuit. Our first chance to share camp coverage. Daniel Gallen, Mark Brennan, Tyler Calvaruso, and myself. We're all over at State College High School on Sunday afternoon, actually into Sunday morning as well. Got a long look at a pair of future Penn State quarterbacks in Peyton Falzone and Troy Huhn during the Elite 11 Regional. We also saw some future Nittany Lions linemen going at it during those kind of drills. So we're going to break down a lot of our takeaways from our first look at camp action here in 2025. In the weeks and months ahead, we'll have a lot more opportunities to see prospects in front of us doing competitive action, and we'll report back over at Lions247.com. But when you get two quarterbacks sharing the same field, there's obviously a lot to discuss. We'll do that in just a bit. We also have a new wave of players here on campus for Penn State. Tyler Calvaruso was on our last episode of this podcast, which dropped last Friday. We talked about more than a dozen new Nittany Lions who are making their way to campus. We pointed out a few in particular, spotlighted them. Check out our last episode. We'll work through some of those newcomers again here, bring Daniel Gallen into the conversation. There was also a surprise addition to this group of newcomers that we'll get to as well. And then we'll close out this episode by looking back at last week's official visit weekend. Really important opportunity for Penn State's coaching staff to get several of their top targets at a variety of positions on campus for a solid 48-hour period. Tyler Calvaruso will work our way through some of those top targets, maybe what Penn State was able to accomplish during their stay and what we're looking to head toward next, including a commitment announcement that is due in the next couple of days. So without further ado, let's bring in Daniel Gallen and Tyler Calvaruso. Set the stage a little bit there, fellas, for what we've got cooking in this particular episode. And Tyler, I referenced the fact that we did just break down that big group of newcomers just last episode, but tacked on a really interesting addition to that group. Why don't you tell our folks about Daniel Jennings? I know you've kind of been praising him in that 2026 class, but he's pulling a Max Granville, not doing it at the last second like Granville did last year, a few days before preseason camp. But Jennings going from one of the top-rated players of Penn State's 26 class to a member of their 2025 freshman class, announced as signed and on campus here just a little while before we sat down to record this podcast on a Tuesday. So, Tyler, you had the initial report confirming Jennings' early impending arrival a few days back at Lions247.com. Now that he's officially in the fold, tell us everything we need to know about how this happened.
Similar thought process to Granville, really. Just the feeling of not having a whole lot left to accomplish in the high school ranks. And for Jennings, the only difference between Granville and Jennings was, the level of competition and the geographical aspect of it. Granville was still going up against some pretty good Texas competition. West Virginia competition for Jennings, it's not at that level. And he was ready to roll against some higher competition. He was ready to roll with his development, getting that strength and conditioning program early, get with Deion Barnes and start to fine tune some parts of his game that he needs to work on. He's going to be joining this class earlier than originally anticipated. Second straight year we have something play out in this manner. The conversations were taking place behind the scenes for a little bit. It comes together. Jennings puts pen to paper on Tuesday morning. I think it's an overall beneficial move. I don't think there's much downside to it. Again, you get him a year earlier. You get him in that weight room with Chuck Losey, and we've seen guys take off right off the bat in that regard. So the Daniel Jennings that we see right now could be a vastly different kind of cat this time next year in terms from a physical standpoint. And he's got a frame that can add a lot of weight, and it can be a lot of good weight, and he's going to maintain that athleticism that Penn State likes so much. So it's a plus in that regard. And I mean, for Jennings too, as well, he gets an IL earlier than you're expected. That's part of the equation that we have to discuss now. And I just think for him, it was the right decision in pretty much the exact same way it was the right decision for Max Granville.
Before we talk about some of the other pickups, Daniel, and how you maybe think they contribute toward a championship chase for Penn State, I want to discuss Jennings because he adds to this group of young, unproven pass rushers at this level of the sport, but Granville is in that mix as well. He got to campus a year ahead of what was expected last July. He joined the likes of Jalen Harvey and Malachi Williams in that class. These guys are now redshirt freshmen this year. Ivan Kamaju came to campus, did some good things during spring ball as a true freshman. I know Tyler Calvaruso, just on our last episode, was really singing the praises of Chaz Coleman, who they're adding out of Ohio, who they beat out the Ohio State Buckeyes to bring to campus another edge rusher. And so it's quite the stockpile, Daniel, when you kind of work through what Deion Barnes is going to be observing on the field in the coming months? And what do you make of what's at his disposal beyond the spotlight of a guy like Denai Dennis Sutton and Zariah Fisher right now?
Yeah, I think the Daniel Jennings addition is really interesting. Maybe next year, maybe longer term. You talk about Max Granville and doing something similar. Granville was in that position where they preserved his red shirt. In the playoff, depending on what happened with Abdul Carter, he was ready to go just in case. Ultimately, we saw what Abdul Carter did against Notre Dame and what he played through. But yeah, I just think that it boosts the depth at a position where you can never really have too many guys. We know that Penn State likes to rotate through their defensive ends, that you want to keep them fresh. You want to have these guys in the fourth quarter, ready to go when it comes, against these different offensive tackles. You want your guys to be fresher. So the more bodies you have there, I think the more that helps. What that looks like with Daniel Jennings, we'll see. Like, I'm really intrigued to get the feedback from James Franklin and potentially later on from Deion Barnes on where he is. I was looking at some of our reporting last summer. I think Tyler Calvaruso had a nice piece about what we saw from Daniel Jennings at that one camp when he was really getting put through the paces by Deion Barnes. And I think we had his weight in the mid 220s at that point. Penn State announced him at 250 pounds today. When you talk about when Max Granville came in last year, I think he was in the upper 220s, when he got to campus and kind of went through the strength process with Chuck Losey. So I am curious to see what it looks like when the strength staff gets its hands on Daniel Jennings, puts him through the paces this summer, and maybe where he is when we get to August and into September. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's pretty exciting. You talk about the kind of unproven guys that Penn State has. There are opportunities to step up here. And I think that James Franklin and Deion Barnes have shown they don't really care how old you are or how long you've been on campus. If you can do it, that they want you.
I'm glad you brought that up, Daniel, because listed at 250 pounds on this announcement does turn some heads. I believe he was in the 220-pound range for much of the time at our 247 sports profile. Tyler, does that change anything about how you view Daniel Jennings? And generally speaking, I know he was one of those players that you were higher on in the entire 2026 class, especially on the defensive side of the football. Do you adjust your initial expectations for his college career? Because, of course, he is getting to campus a lot earlier than we thought, and he doesn't have that spring practice under his belt that he may have had he shown up next winter.
It doesn't. I knew he was working hard in the weight room. It was something that he made pretty clear. Once basketball season wrapped up for him, he got right to work. I knew he had added around 10, 15 pounds, so I thought he was more in the 235, 240 range at this point. 250, eye-popping in a good way. I think, it speaks to the work he's put in. He once basketball season wrapped, he knew what direction he wanted to take things, and he had a pretty good grasp of what it was going to take to be ready to go at Penn State right off the bat. I think the big thing for Daniel Jennings was he didn't want to arrive on campus and be behind the eight ball from a physical perspective. He wanted to be trending in the right direction ahead of time. And I think going from that 220, 225 range to 245, 250, the 250 listing, it speaks to what he's done, and he's been really locked in on his nutrition, his weight training program. And that's something that works in lockstep with Penn State as well. They are very aware of what he had been accomplishing in the weight room, adding pounds, adding good muscle. So it doesn't change my projection in terms of what he can accomplish in year one. There are a couple different reasons for that. One, the defensive end depth chart being what it is. He's walking into a pretty crowded and loaded room. So it's it's tough to climb in the trenches when you go from high school competition in West Virginia to Big Ten offensive linemen trying to beat those guys out on a daily basis. I think Jennings, he's heading in the right direction, but he still has some growing to do as a player. He needs to get better against the run. A lot of what he was doing in high school, pure pass rush, get after the opposing quarterbacks, and he's really, really good at it. That's where his strength lies. But get better against the run, be more consistent setting that edge. It's just kind of natural defensive end things that you take to once you reach the next level, because your responsibilities in high school, they're far different than they are when you get to college and you're going to do some more advanced things for a defense. So I think that's where Jennings is at right now. But physically, everything he's been doing, it's encouraging. It's going to put him in more of a position to compete right off the bat. That's for sure, because coming in 220 versus coming in 245, 250, that's a completely different world.
102 days before Penn State kicks off its season. That means he'll get a nice little cushion here in terms of getting acclimated on campus before putting on the pads in August. That's something that Max Granville certainly didn't have last year, showing up to campus that last week of July. And Daniel, I think we can probably categorize Jennings as more of a long-term monitor situation among the guys who just get into the fold for this roster. When you look at players who can contribute to a championship ambition here at Penn State, can be part of that equation on a consistent basis, who stands out? Obviously, you focus in on those two transfers who were officially announced by Penn State today at receiver and linebacker, and I'm probably going to hear some things from you there. But if there are any freshmen as well, don't be shy about including them in your answer here.
Yeah, I think when you talk about the three guys that Penn State announced today, the signings, I think in terms of the order of impact that you would expect to see this year, I think it's number one, Trevor Pena at wide receiver, number two, Amari Campbell at linebacker, and then Daniel Jennings down at number three with that defensive end group. I think that with how this Penn State roster is set up, it is really fortified in a way that you don't need any of these freshmen who come in right at this point in the year to be guys that, we have to have them play this fall. We need them to step up right away. I think that, the kind of the developing and recruiting that Penn State has done, it's a really solid depth chart. And I know that every year in the offseason, we kind of try to talk about position battles, storylines at different spots. And sometimes it can be kind of difficult because we kind of know how things are going to go in different spots. And so, I think that when you talk about newcomers in this current window who are going to affect Penn State this fall, I think you have to go with Pena. We've talked a lot about the wide receiver position. I liked what we saw from Kyron Hudson and Devontae Ross during the spring. I thought both flashed a little bit in the blue-white game, but Penn State, you need more than two wide receivers. Sometimes I think you need more than three wide receivers to get through a year, especially when you consider losing Tyler Warren and what that is going to look like. So I think that Pena, with where things stand right now, he's the guy that I think has the best path to make an impact. Amari Campbell, I think that what we saw this spring, I think that you could make the case that, okay, you can see a pathway for him, but got to remind ourselves, we didn't see Tony Rojas out there at all this spring. Didn't see Dakari Nelson out there at all this spring. That linebacker group was thin, but there are some top line guys or guys further up the depth chart who are going to factor in. So I think with Pena, I think that's where you start in terms of this exercise.
Recent episodes here on the podcast, hopefully you caught them. We had a North Carolina insider, Jason Staples, breaking down Amari Campbell's career down there in Chapel Hill, what he did for that defense last year, not only getting those 6.5 sacks, but also wearing that green dot, having the communications in his helmet and calling those plays and being a peer-to-peer leader. Additionally, we had Mike McAllister from our Syracuse site within the 247 Sports Network discussing Trevor Pena's rise there. It wasn't a 4 years of dominance type of career for him at Syracuse. Big breakout year last year. Injuries were part of the process. A new quarterback was part of that. So some recent episodes, hopefully you caught them. If you didn't, I'd encourage you to circle back and learn a little bit more about both Pena and Campbell. Tyler Calvaruso and I discussed the more than 10 freshmen who are added here in the month of May. You throw Jennings on top of that list, but guys like Malachi Goodman, Jeff Exeter Jr., all part of that process, getting underway, trying to learn the ropes here for Penn State early on in their career so they can hit the ground running when practices begin in August. And let's turn our attention towards the future of Penn State football, because while this 2025 roster gets finalized and we get a chance to really see them on the field in a few months, you're always looking toward the next wave of incoming talent. And that means the 2026 class is entering a larger, expanded spotlight with official visits and with camp season. We got our first brush with that group on the camp field last Sunday, just a couple days ago. I had a chance to go over to State College High School. Third consecutive year that the Elite 11 camp circuit has finished here in central Pennsylvania. We're very grateful that they'd bring it to our doorstep. It's certainly a pretty awesome thing. In years past, we've had to go to the Jets facilities in New Jersey, over to Philadelphia. And so for them to come right here to State College is pretty sweet. I know Penn State doesn't mind it as well. And both Penn State QB commits from the 2026 cycle were present. Out of Southern California, Troy Huhn, and out of here in Pennsylvania, you had Peyton Falzone. We'll talk about what we saw from both of those guys, but starting things off, Tyler, this is just the kickoff for us with camp coverage at Lions 24/7. I know you've got plans to hit the road this upcoming week. Penn State camps become a weekly staple of our coverage in just a matter of 2 weeks. That first day of June, I think June 1st is when we get our first prospect camp here in Happy Valley. But Tyler, give our listeners, our viewers, just a little bit of a layout of what they can expect from our coverage now that we're rolling into this part of the year.
Yeah, camp season has finally reached the Northeast. It's been rolling along elsewhere for a while now, but the weather's getting warmer. Northeast, things are starting to heat up, and that means camp season's heating up. Had the Elite 11, the opening this past season this past weekend with the All-22 regional. That was great stuff that we got to see. Had plenty of really good coverage coming out of that. This upcoming weekend on Saturday, we have Under Armour, New Jersey. I'm going to be out there at that. That's a really, really good camp this year. There's going to be a lot of Penn State commits, targets on the field. So stay tuned with that because there is going to be a ton to take away from Under Armour, New Jersey. Then the weekend after that, it's not just Penn State's big OV weekend with all the commits. You've got camp, the first Elite Showcase prospect camp, as you mentioned, Tyler, and Under Armour Baltimore as well. Under Armour Baltimore is a little bit more interesting this year because obviously it's taking place during official visit weekend for a lot of recruits. So there's not going to be as heavy of a 2026 presence, it's looking like. There's still going to be some high-level 26s who have some sort of tie to Penn State, whether it be a visit coming up or they're on the board in some capacity. So it's not going to be, a complete dud, but when it comes to 26 guys, but there's going to be a lot of high-level 27 guys. And even though 26s are at the center of the recruiting world right now, we're always looking ahead to the future, always looking at that 27 class. A 27 class where Penn State's already hit the ground running with some of the guys they have on board. So there is a lot to come on the camp circuit coming up. I'm really excited about it. I know you guys are really excited about it. These Elite Showcase prospect camps, the 7-on-7s, they're always a lot of fun to cover. And it's always a lot of fun to see what talent rolls into town.
We were out there on Sunday early on. We stuck around until late afternoon, and along the way, we got a long look at those two future Penn State quarterbacks, Troy Huhn and Peyton Falzone. A ton of content and coverage over at Lions247.com. We have video highlight packages from both of those quarterbacks, right around 3 minutes for each of them. You get a really good chance to see these guys working through different drills, working through different arm slots. And then additionally, we had a story up from Daniel on Sunday evening about how this happened to be the first in-person encounter between Falzone and Huhn. And when you are committed as part of a 2-quarterback class, you're kind of attaching yourself at the hip, at least to start your college career, with that other passer. So these two players, not only are going to be sharing tight quarters in a quarterback room come next winter when they make their move, but they're going to be kind of hinging each other's dreams on that competition within that class and then across that room. Daniel, what stood out to you? Because we heard it from two different perspectives. They're both downtown on Sunday morning, trying to get some calories in their system before they head out to the camp. And from across the room, there's the other quarterback that I'm going to be sharing a class with and sharing a room with in the coming years. I thought you did a great job recapping that and kind of bringing that to our audience. What would you like to share here on the podcast?
Yeah, and it was pretty interesting to hear both of them talk about it. Falzone said that he was going to Bagel Crust downtown by Target. He saw Troy Huhn about 200 yards away and just started yelling at him to get his attention. And that was the first time that these guys have met. Falzone said that they were both at the SMU game in December, which was where recruits had to pay their own way to go to that college football playoff game. They hadn't met there, but they'd been in touch since Falzone joined the class last month as that second quarterback recruit. I think that it's interesting when you consider the dynamics of it and everything. But I think the one thing that both of them said, and they said it in their different ways. We talked about Troy Huhn from outside of San Diego, a little bit of that SoCal laid back, West Coast guy. Falzone, I think, came off as a very dynamic personality. He seems really thoughtful, really cerebral, really talkative. I think that if you put their transcripts side by side, that kind of showed through. I think they both said that it's going to be competition, and it doesn't matter if they're the only quarterback in the class, if there's 2 quarterbacks in the class. When they get to Penn State, there's already going to be guys here. And so there's going to be competition no matter what, whether that's with a classmate, whether that's with someone older, whether that's someone who comes in the class of 2027. So I think that both of these guys have a good mindset. They're both going to enroll early, get on campus as soon as possible to really begin that process. Falzone talked about wanting to have the opportunity to overlap with Drew Aller for a little bit, through that postseason, however long it lasts, however many bowl games it involves, to learn from him and then take that moving forward into spring ball next year. So I think that both of these guys seem to have the right attitude about being in a 2 quarterback class. I think they both understand that as quarterbacks, they have that role as the peer recruiter, as someone that in a recruiting class that people look to, and they're embracing that, I think, in their own ways. So it's going to be interesting. But I think the early feedback, having these two guys meet for the first time in state college in this setting, getting to spend a lot of time working together, they were chatting the whole time, a lot of smiles, a lot of joking around. I think that whole top group of quarterbacks that they were with at Elite 11, I think there's a lot of camaraderie, a lot of support, and I think both of those guys fit right in. So it's going to be an interesting storyline to follow, I think.
They're definitely among the more physically impressive passers that we saw out there. There were dozens of quarterbacks from a couple different classes. Many of them have power conference offers. A few of them were committed to power conference programs. And these two, both nearing 6'5" right now, as they're a few months away from the start of their senior seasons. You got Troy Huhn in 215 to 220 pound range. You got Falzone kind of right there flirting with the 200-pound mark. He's more of a slender build right now. He's got those broad shoulders. We've discussed a bit of his background, not just as a track sprinter, but also as a swimmer. And I think you can kind of see that show up in his physical build. Tyler, you've spoken to both of these guys for several months. We're a little more well acquainted with Troy Huhn at this point because he's been committed since last summer, whereas Falzone makes his move last month. He previously pledged to Virginia Tech. He had previously talked to Penn State staff about coming on as maybe a multi-position player, maybe looking like a Tyler Warren type path and playing tight end at the next level. Well, we've come a long way in the Falzone conversation, so I want to start there. It was our first chance collectively to see him. He's put in a lot of work with Brad Mendler behind the scenes, his quarterback trainer, who also works with Drew Aller, also works with Ethan Grunkemeyer, also, as it turns out, has been working with Troy Huhn. But what did you make of our latest look at Peyton Falzone, a player who is more highly rated than Troy Huhn right now in our 24/7 sports rankings? But I think as we walked away from the field and as we kind of digested a little bit of what we witnessed, a lot of that is tied to the ceiling of Peyton Falzone versus what is there presently when you get these guys side by side.
You can see why the ceiling is what it is, right? I mean, you just get one look at Falzone in person and you see the frame and you see what can be accomplished on that front with all of his athleticism and the natural arm strength. He's definitely improved on the mechanical front. I don't think there's any really arguing that. The work that he's put in, he has made some pretty serious strides from where he was when you guys saw him at Elite 11 last year compared to now. It's a different kind of quarterback. Is there still plenty of room to grow? Yes, he's far from a finished product. There are still aspects of his footwork, his upper body mechanics. It's still coming together for Peyton Falzone, but he has improved. There's no doubt about that. I think if you put on the film as well from his junior season, you could see some pretty clear differences in the throwing motion. And there's just more fluidity to it now. There's less of a hitch. Again, there's still some things that need to be cleaned up, and I think consistency will be a big thing for Peyton Falzone. I think, and Tyler, you brought this up when we were talking about it after camp, kind of making sure the footwork and the upper body movement, it all aligns when it comes to him, squaring his shoulders, firing it off downfield. I think once he gets to that point in his development, you're going to see the accuracy really improve and just all of the athletic traits that make him such a potential high-level prospect. I think if he puts all the pieces together, you can see why the ceiling is what it is. You can see why the ranking is what it is. So for me, it was really encouraging to see the strides that he has made in person because we saw plenty of it on social media, right? The Twitter clips, that was all well and good, but we got the chance to see it with our own eyes Sunday, and it was pretty encouraging.
Yeah, I felt like the muscle memory was more apparent with Troy Huhn, especially when they put these guys through kind of a structure where they simulate the pass rush. You simulate a messy pocket. You're not exactly sure where that blitz is going to come from. One of the assistant coaches would charge at you from your left or from your right or from behind you and from in front of you. And I felt like in those kind of scenarios, Troy Huhn's muscle memory and the fundamental attachment from his upper body all the way down to his feet. He was able to lean on that, and he was consistent with that, where it wasn't as clean, maybe with Falzone, where the lower body didn't play along with the upper body on some of those moments. And so ultimately, Daniel, when we get a chance to see Falzone, you see the flick of the wrist. He can throw darts with the football. He put some nice zip on that football. But in talking with the Elite 11 staff, they pointed to a couple things: the consistency and the footwork. But they also made a point to note what he can do on film. It's something that wasn't really going to show through on camp field on Sunday. But we happen to have a coach on the Elite 11 staff that we caught up with, Chad Henne, who coached against him on the field in pads last year with his alma mater, Wilson High School. Henne, of course, former All Big Ten quarterback out of the state of Pennsylvania, went to Michigan, still holds the Michigan passing records for yards and touchdown throws, played 15 years in the NFL, won a couple of championships as Pat Mahomes' backup with the Kansas City Chiefs before retiring in 2023. And so he's a volunteer coach at Wilson High School here in Pennsylvania, and he was on that Elite 11 staff here during the state college camp. And what he said about this kid is the consistency needs to come in the pocket. That's what you're seeing right now. There's some growing pains there. But when he gets out of the pocket, he is a major threat. He talked about you need to identify him as someone you need to spy on with a linebacker at the high school level. And so I think, Daniel, much like we talked about Prabula a few years back, in a setting like this, he is the quarterback where it's hard to get the complete comprehensive understanding of the skill set, because so much of what we love about Troy Huhn and what Penn State loves about him is apparent in the pocket, not so much for Peyton Falzone.
Yeah, it's kind of the dynamic that comes into play in terms of trying to evaluate these guys in this setting. I posed the question to Falzone where he was talking about the work he's done with Brad Mendler, which includes leaving at Friday night from his home in Nazareth, getting to Ohio at 1 a.m. on Saturday morning, working all day Saturday, half a day Sunday, then driving home Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening. He said he's done that 14 times, over the past 6 months in terms of, reworking his mechanics, reworking his, footwork, everything that goes along with it. And I posed a question to him, what's it going to be like when you're actually in games now? Because he hasn't had the chance to, bring these new mechanics, this new skill set, this revamped throwing motion into actual 11 on 11, tackle, hostile defense environment. And he said he's really looking forward to it. He thinks it's going to benefit him a lot. He said that he's learned that he has a lot more arm talent than he might have thought he had. His receivers at Nazareth are starting to get used, or having to get used to the ball getting on them quicker, because he's learned that he can generate a little bit more torque, a little bit more speed with that ball coming out of his hand. And so I think it's going to be really interesting to see what this looks like when he gets onto the field in August or September, whenever Nazareth's games start, because I think that he'll look like a little bit of a different quarterback. And I think it's also intriguing is with how does that mesh with this athleticism that we see on his huddle tape from last year, that Chad Henne is talking about in terms of needing to have a spy on him. I think that Falzone has the potential to mold some different skill sets together. Because we've seen a lot of Brad Mendler's work over these past couple of years with what he's done with Drew Aller, what he's done with Ethan Grunkemeyer, a little bit of Troy Huhn work, but none of those guys are, I think, the type of athlete that Falzone is and have that sort of physical skill set. So I think that when we get into this fall, every Saturday or Sunday, whenever those huddle highlights go up from Peyton Falzone, it's going to be really interesting to see how all of this meshes together with him, because I think it has the potential to make a really interesting quarterback prospect.
And he showed a live arm from some different arm slots. There's a twitchy nature about his ability to get the ball out quickly. Now, where the ball went, whether it sailed on the receiver a little bit or kind of went awry, that was kind of what you didn't see consistently as we kind of reviewed on Sunday. But the tools are there. He is the number 11 quarterback in our rankings at 247 Sports. He is inside the top 200. Troy Huhn is just outside of the top 200. I think he's 202 overall. He's the number 14 quarterback nationally. And I want to make this clear too, and you're kind of juxtaposing these two quarterbacks, but Huhn is not a stiff by any means. In fact, Henny said he's a big body quarterback who moves better than most of his peers across the country at that kind of size at this particular age. I know Drew Aller, he was a bigger bodied quarterback in high school, and he could get on the move a little bit. And you appreciated that, but that's something they really had to work on here at Penn State with Chuck Losey, and you've seen that show up in game film. That's really where Henny said the next step is for Huhn. He was kind of saying conversely to where it is for Falzone, where you want to do everything you can to build upon what he's doing in between the tackles, behind the line of scrimmage, looking downfield. You want to make sure Huhn can be a threat with his feet, to extend pass plays, to get downfield and move the chains as a runner. I think we certainly saw the foundational athleticism from Huhn. I thought he looked really strong on some designed rollout plays that the Elite 11 staff put him through. Again, he was one of the standouts from this entire camp when they made the pocket dirty on him and he had to identify the read and find the target downfield. He did that with consistency. He did that with precision. He did that with poise. And I walked away thinking that, Tyler, I think Troy Huhn, he's going to go back home now to Southern California. He's going to play his senior year at Mission Hills High School. But when you look at the prospect Penn State's going to add in December and January for his winter arrival, he's up there with just about anybody they've added, not named Drew Aller, in my opinion, in terms of pure passing pedigree and what we witnessed on Sunday.
Yeah, I think he was, I don't want to say better than I thought he was going to be, because it's pretty clear when you evaluate Troy Huhn what his strengths are, but he was definitely more athletic than I thought he was going to be. And I think just consistency wise, he was, for my money, he was the most consistent quarterback there. And him and Derek Zamet, who's a Washington commit, they both had themselves a day. I mean, Troy Huhn's accuracy down the field was really impressive. Just his throws on the run were impressive. It's rare that I go out there and I see a quarterback performance where you don't really walk away with any questions about what it could be. I think Troy Huhn physically, mentally, because there is a mental aspect to these camps too. There's a lot of throwing of the football throughout the day. You can wear down. The Troy Huhn that we saw his first throw of the day, same Troy Huhn we saw at the end of the day. The accuracy was still on point. The velocity was still on point. He was still engaged and locked in. That's a really big part of the evaluation process for me, because you just never know how a guy is going to react in a competitive setting. Troy Huhn showed exactly who he is as a competitor. So it was a very impressive camp performance. I think it's a performance that he could look back on and be pretty pleased with himself about. I think Penn State has to like what he accomplished out there on the field on Sunday. And you also saw the difference in skill set and how these two quarterbacks can complement each other in this 26 class. You see Troy Huhn, he's a little bit further along in his development as a natural quarterback. Falzone still coming into his own. They both do a lot of things well. They do some different things well. And overall for Huhn, it was just, I keep coming back to it. It was a really, really solid showing.
And we've heard James Franklin say as recently as last month that if you're going to sign two quarterbacks in the same class out of high school, they need to have different skill sets. You don't want a clone of each other. They're certainly getting that here. Daniel, anything to tack on with Troy Huhn? I'll also add one of the Elite 11 coaches described him as, quote, owning the space in his drill work. And I did think he carried himself with that kind of quiet confidence, whereas Falzone reminded me of a guy you want to hang out with on the back of the bus after a baseball game or on the way back from a football win and just hear him talk it up and hype everybody up, because he's got that kind of a personality. Huhn, a little bit more contained within himself, but I think there's a real quiet, confident air about him.
I think that definitely showed through. I think that, when you talk about some of these guys that have that laid back kind of label put on them, because of where they're from or whatever, you're interested to see, in action what it looks like. And I think that owning the space is a good way to put it, because, even if he wasn't necessarily the most vocal guy, he was near the front of the line in a lot of the drills. You could tell that he was really engaged, offering pointers, chatting guys up. And, there's a lot of competitors in that group, and you can't really discount that. Derek Zamet got the invite. He's a Washington commit. You have some other guys that are going to end up playing at Power 4 schools in there too. So I think for Troy Huhn to stand out in that type of environment with that type of group, I think when you talk about intangibles, I think that bodes well for projecting moving forward with him.
I'll just note he did not get the invite. Only one invite in person, and went to Zamet out of New Jersey, going to Washington for college. But talking to some Elite 11 coaches afterwards, I certainly get the sense that Troy Huhn is well positioned to pick up one of the remaining invitations to the Elite 11 finals. They'll occur toward the end of June out in Los Angeles. It's a 3-day, highly intensive workout for these quarterbacks where they get put through the ringer in the film room, at the board, and certainly on the field through a bunch of drills. We've seen eventual Heisman Trophy winners, number one draft picks, Penn State quarterbacks like Drew Aller, Ethan Grunkemeyer, Sean Clifford go through that final process. And we'll get a chance in the next few days to learn if Huhn will add his name to that list. I think it's more of an uphill battle for Falzone coming off of that camp performance than it is for Huhn, but I think Penn State will be in a good spot to be represented on that finals list in Los Angeles. We got more takeaways from the quarterback group and a lot more from this camp overall at Lions247.com. Tyler Calvaruso put together a notebook, gathered some of our thoughts as well for that one. But I want to jump into some of the lineman work we saw before we turn our attention with Tyler toward the official visitors from last weekend. And so, Daniel, while we still got you on board, let's discuss the defensive linemen and the offensive linemen that we saw getting after each other, getting after some other prospects. Leighton Von Brandt, who is a top 100 offensive tackle out of Delaware in the 27 class for Penn State. He's been on board with this group since before his sophomore season of high school. And then additionally, we got a long look at Isaac Chukwura out of Delaware, considered the top overall prospect from that state in the 26 class. Defensive lineman, showed some really interesting things and with his movement at that size. And so start wherever you'd like, Daniel, but I thought it was a good opportunity, and two guys that showed up really hungry for reps. There was no hiding toward the back of the line from either of these players in camp work.
Yeah, I'll start with Von Brandt because he's someone that we've had, I think, a little bit of a longer term exposure to with, at the Elite 11 All-22 last spring and through the camp circuit. I wrote this down in the notes I sent Tyler on Sunday, that he's a different type of prospect, but he does remind me a little bit of Cooper Cousins in terms of the way that he carries himself, the confidence that he has, and just kind of where he is at this, being so young at this point in his career and seeming pretty advanced. I think that I saw some, I guess, intangible similarities in the two. I think obviously they're really different prospects, but with Von Brandt, watching him at his size go through drills, I thought he moved really smoothly. I thought that his lateral quickness looked good. He's not stiff by any means, which when you see someone of his size, that's something that you worry about a little bit. And I think that compared to what some of the other linemen looked like at Elite 11, Von Brandt really stood out in terms of that athleticism and just, and just his size. Like, he is a big dude. We can see that over the past year since he's been on our radar, he's developed. You can see that he's, getting older in terms of, how he's carrying some of that weight on his body, how he's filling out. I think that he is just he's a very exciting prospect to watch in terms of where the arrow is pointing with him, and still got a couple years of high school left to work through that. With Chukwura, someone who at least for me, given my coverage area, came onto my radar a little bit later in this process, but seeing him in person, I came away really impressed. He did very well in his reps against Von Brandt coming off the edge. He was twitchy. I thought he had a good first step. I thought that he knew how to handle the different offensive linemen that he was going up against, and that stood out to me in a really positive way. He told me afterwards that the plan is that he's going to be on the interior at the next level. He's watching a lot of Zane Durant film. He's at 6'2", 270 right now, and if he can keep some of this twitchiness, some of this quickness, athleticism that we saw on Sunday, while putting on weight to play on the interior in the Big Ten, I think that you're looking at a really intriguing defensive tackle at the next level. So I came away really impressed with him, both in terms of interviewing him, discussing what this process has been like for him, what it was like competing against guys on Sunday, and then also just with what he did on the field. I was going through some of the video clips afterwards that I took, and he just seemed like he knew how to handle himself in that one-on-one setting, and that showed with the results that he got in those reps.
Interesting measurements that you're able to provide there. Some updated measurements at 270 pounds. I think Chuck Wura, because he was getting all his reps that we witnessed on the perimeter at defensive end. And even at that size, I wouldn't have guessed he was that big because he was springy. I thought he was light on his feet, even just in his 3-point stance, kind of, getting ready for the snap. Just you could see the anticipation from him. There was nothing difficult about getting into that bend and staying there for him. And so I think ultimately to see him getting that work and knowing he's going to be moving inside when it comes to working with Deion Barnes down the road, I think that's going to be great for him. We've seen that pay off for guys who played their high school ball, camped at defensive end. Keziah Izzard's a guy who comes to mind. You come to campus, you put on that weight, and all of a sudden you still have some of those twitchy abilities on an interior spot, which makes you more of a rare presence on the defensive line than if you were still on the perimeter. And Tyler, circling back a little bit to Leighton Von Brandt, he's somebody that we got a chance to see at this camp a year ago, and I think then he was maybe 250 pounds or so, 260 pounds. He is now 270. He said he was around 265, 270, but he looks thinner almost than he did last year, and yet he's filled out. So it's an interesting thing. He's probably weighs not all that different than he did last year, maybe 5-10 pounds heavier, but he actually looks like he's gotten less sloppy. And I think so you're seeing those things trend in the right direction from him from physical development and everything this young man says. And this is going back to a year ago. You want to be his teammate. You want to be on this guy's side of the field because he fires you up. He's an emotional presence in a camp setting. And even when talking to you, I said, what's your recruiting pitch? Because he really wants to be a spearhead type leader for that 2027 group. He's going hard after another top offensive lineman, Max Hiller, for example, to join that class. And we have video of this over at Lions247.com. I'll write something on it this week, but he laid out his case for joining Penn State and what you might miss out if you don't. And I'm telling you, this guy can be a face of the class type presence, which you can't always say about an offensive lineman. And so, Tyler, when you throw Chuck Wura and you throw Von Brandt on the table for this conversation, what do you take away from our recent run-in with them?
Yeah, Von Brandt's definitely leaned out. It's a body composition kind of deal, right? You add some pounds, you shed some fat, and he's heading in the right direction on the physical front, which doesn't surprise me. I mean, Leighton Von Brandt, he takes pride in, I think, pretty much every single aspect of his development. If you just take one look at his social media presence, you could see that he's very locked in on what needs to be done to reach that next level. And he goes out there and he does it quite consistently. He's getting stronger in the lower half. I think that for me was probably the most notable aspect of his physical development, seeing it in person. Just stronger lower half now than it was at this time last year. So that's a positive. He's starting to put some more plates on that barbell when he's squatting. And you could see it, the kick step has improved. He's more mechanically sound. He plays a little bit high sometimes, but I mean, he's a tall kid and he's young. So I don't think that really strikes anyone as a surprise. He's improved on that front as well. And then with Chukwara, it took about all of maybe 5-10 minutes max to fully understand why there's so many people inside of Lash who are high on him and high on his potential. I mean, just watching him go through drill work, watching him work the bags, the footwork is top notch. The athleticism pops quite clearly. It's tough to miss. A kid that size should not be moving as well as Isaac Chukwara does. And it was evident throughout the camp that he has very clear power forward potential. And if he was a guy who camped around a little bit more, maybe there was would have been some more offers on the table, because what we saw, I think, Sunday was thoroughly impressive. I think on every front. He was very difficult to beat in one-on-ones. He gave Leighton Von Brandt some real problems in one-on-ones, which is not easy. I don't think there were some pretty solid defensive linemen in attendance, but none of them gave Von Brandt a run the way Isaac Chukwara gave him a run. So if you're a Penn State fan and you're wondering more about Chukwara and why he was a take at that time that he committed, so soon after the Nittany Lions rolled out his offer, reflect back on this conversation, because he's looking like the real deal. And I know it's different when the pads go on, but take a look at his film. What he does in a camp setting from an athleticism standpoint translates to when the pads go on. And those two are going to see each other again on the field this fall. They're going to play each other down in Delaware, and that's going to be a really, really intriguing matchup. One I'm very excited about, and one that I know those two are very excited about.
Yeah, Von Brandt, as they were parting ways from their last rep, was quick to note, well, next time we'll have the pads on this season. And because I think Von Brandt acknowledged to me afterwards, he lost more than he won in that battle between those two. And I don't remember a lot of people beating Chuck Wara. And I'll just tell you, if you showed up to this camp kind of blind to whatever Penn State was doing on the recruiting trail, and you just watched this cluster of linemen, and there were a lot of future power conference linemen as part of this group, I'm pretty sure you would have singled out those two. If I said there's one guy in that defensive line mix that's committed to Penn State, there's one guy in the offensive line mix that's committed to Penn State, I'm pretty sure you would have picked those two. And that's where you want these guys to be, getting a bunch of reps, looking the part, and they did that on Sunday afternoon during our sample size. Daniel, I think we're going to part ways with you now. Thank you for breaking down what you saw from camp. We got a lot more from you over at Lions247.com. Video highlights of those linemen will get up this week as well, so you can take your own look at Von Brandt and at Chuck Wara. Anything else to add before you say goodbye, Daniel?
No, it was good to be back out on the fields with you guys. I think I made the comment where it was like our easing back into the camp process, like our first one back. So when we get to June 1, we'll be ready to roll, and I'm looking forward to another camp season with you guys.
All right, good stuff from Daniel Gallen as always. We'll turn our attention now towards Penn State's recent official visit weekend, and Tyler Calvaruso got us ready for it at Lions247.com last week, and now coming out of it, we've got a lot of feedback to sort through. And why don't we begin with the 5-star who was in town, the top-ranked player in the state of Pennsylvania. He's been a topic of conversation for you and I quite a bit lately, because not only is he such a talent, but he could be a multi-way player at the next level. Joey O'Brien, what did he experience in Happy Valley this time around, and how did Penn State position itself in his recruitment coming out of the experience?
Yeah, you can't start this OV weekend recap without Joey O'Brien, right? He was the headliner. Penn State, again, arguably the top overall target on that board for James Franklin and his staff. I think for me, there are a couple of different takeaways from this official visit, because it was a lot of the same for Joey O'Brien when it comes to what he experienced, in the sense that he's been around so often. The relationships are in a really good place. He knows what Penn State has to offer. Comfort is a very good thing, or a big thing, in Joey O'Brien's recruitment. And it's a good thing that Penn State has going for it in his recruitment, because, again, the relationships, there's a level of trust that has been built up every single time Joey O'Brien makes it out to State College. So when he takes a step back and he looks at Penn State and he compares Penn State to his other suitors, he knows State College is a place where he can truly go there and be comfortable on and off the field. From an on-field perspective, I think the most important part of the pitch was kind of that continued notion that, hey, look, we love you at safety, but we know we're well aware of what you could do at wide receiver at the next level. We think you could play that position at a high level at the next level, and you're going to have the opportunity to do that if you come here. And I think that's a big reason why Penn State is sticking in that top group, along with the likes of Notre Dame, Oregon, Clemson's in the mix, Tennessee. But Penn State, Notre Dame, Oregon, they've all been very clear to Joey O'Brien about what they think he could do on both sides of the ball at the next level. And you're starting to see that top group really, really shine through, and Penn State is part of it. So if you're the Nittany Lions staff, you have to like what you continued to accomplish with Joey O'Brien over the weekend. But he's going to take these OVs, and then it will be, there's no clear timeline for decision right now. But those OVs, we've said it from the start. We're going to continue to say it. When it comes to collecting data points and information, they are crucial for Joey O'Brien and his side.
Are we at the stage of this recruitment process where if you are a college football staff and you're exclusively talking about defense with Joey O'Brien, you're not really a part of the process anymore? Is this exclusively about teams that are presenting pathways on both sides of the ball now, from what you've gathered?
I don't think it's a stretch to say that, because I think he's looking for the best fit to really contribute anywhere. That's the one thing that I picked up on with Joey O'Brien throughout his process. He's a very competitive kid, and he wants to contribute anywhere he can. And that, for him, that means having the chance to play on both sides of the ball. Because I think he's, just like these coaches are well aware of Joey O'Brien's talent on both sides of the ball at receiver and safety, he's well aware of his own talent on that side of the ball. He knows how good he is, and he knows the kind of impact he can make for a program like Penn State, for a program like Notre Dame, for a program like Oregon. So I think those three have done a really good job. That's not to say Clemson and Tennessee haven't as well, but when you ask around and you kind of dive into which programs have laid out that plan the best, it seemed like those three, and Penn State has made a really big impact in that area, because there wasn't always a time where it was that pitch, right? It was a time where it was centered on safety, and not safety exclusively, because I think we just kind of, as O'Brien's recruitment has gone on, the two-way conversation has popped up more and more. But when that offer went out last April, before O'Brien had the junior season that he had, where he caught nearly 65 passes for over 1,000 yards and was dominant at receiver, it was centered exclusively on safety. As time has gone on, that two-way conversation has become more and more prominent, and it has definitely made its way to State College.
We'll see how much time in the defensive backfield that he ultimately spends when he moves on to the college level. That is the anticipated home for Jordan Deck, who is a 4-star safety out of Lone Star High School in the Lone Star State down in Frisco, Texas, one of the top 25 safeties in America, and he happened to spend his past weekend in State College. This is a guy that we were discussing things a little bit coming off of our camp coverage Sunday afternoon, and before you hit the road, went back home, you said Jordan Deck is a guy they made a move on.
Yeah, definitely. So he tried to visit Penn State a couple of different times during the spring. Didn't really work out. And when you see stuff like that happen from a non-region kid, you start to wonder if he's ever actually going to make it to campus. And he did. He bumped up his OV. He was originally set to visit June 6th through the 8th, decided to bump things up to this past weekend, scrapped UCLA from that visit schedule in favor of the Nittany Lions. And I don't think he's regretting that decision. Based on the feedback, he called it an interview with our guy Mike Roach, does a great job in the Texas area. He called it an eye-opening visit. I think State College and Penn State is a place he could definitely see himself playing now that he's made the trip and he's seen everything for himself and he's been around the staff for himself. For me, with Deck, it's going to be a very interesting conversation about where things go at safety for Penn State in general, because in essence, you already have 3 guys at the position in the class. You got Matt Sieg, you got Darryl Carey, and you could consider David Davis from Amani Christian a safety as well. So it's a more interesting crunch at the position than there has been in some recent cycles where the board was a little bit, not as expanded, but Penn State wouldn't have brought Jordan Deck out for an official visit if they weren't really interested in adding him to this class. And I think the staff definitely strengthened its chances of that happening. Now, moving forward, I'm keeping a close eye on what Deck has coming up with Michigan. May 30th through June 1st, he's going to be in Ann Arbor for his official with the Wolverines. That's one I've been told to keep a really close eye on. And then his trips to Ole Miss and Baylor in June. Ole Miss is June 13th through the 15th. Baylor is June 20th through 22nd before the dead period. Those are going to carry some weight as well. But Penn State, they left a really strong first impression on Jordan Deck over the weekend.
All right, we talked about receiver/safety, a safety. How about just a straight-up receiver now? Messiah Hampton, one of our favorites from the camp circuit last summer, a guy who shined, earned Penn State opportunity, has several opportunities across the Power Conference landscape, and big-time talent out of the state of New York. He was back in town. I didn't talk about this when we were discussing the quarterbacks, but Troy Huhn shared this one with me. He got to campus ahead of the Elite 11 camp, so he was here in State College on Saturday. Went over, actually sat down next to Messiah Hampton during some dinner. He's in his official visit. He's got a future Penn State quarterback, just tapping on his shoulder, making sure he's having a good time. Troy Huhn told me that Messiah Hampton is his priority to bring on board for the 2026 class at wide receiver. He thinks they could have a lot of fun together in the years ahead. So how has Penn State helped itself with Messiah Hampton coming off this visit, and what kind of a battle do they still face?
There are questions about Hampton, even making this visit really leading into the week. Marcus Hagan's made it up to New York, checked in with Hampton in person, got things back on track, got Hampton back to campus for this official visit. And it seems like things went well with Hampton while he was on campus. That being said, you look at some of the other suitors in this recruitment and the Oregons and the Ohio States of the world. Oregon is the one that really jumps out to me right now. Ohio State's right in that mix. So Penn State I think they're still fighting from behind in this recruitment. I think if I were to handicap it right now, that probably more likely that this is one that goes elsewhere. But Penn State's continuing to fight this fight, and I think they did all they could with Hampton while he was on campus during the official visit. And again, feedback from that visit has been positive. It seems like it was a good time for all parties involved with Hampton, and it seemed like he's still giving Penn State some very real consideration. But Oregon's jumping out to me. Ohio State's jumping out to me to a degree as well. Miami's in that mix. Hampton's going to get out. He's going to make these visits. There's an NIL aspect of this recruitment as well. That's undeniable. So we'll see where things go on that front. But if I had to peg this one, even with what Penn State did with Hampton over the weekend, probably more likely elsewhere.
So Troy Huhn may want to follow up on that one with an email or a text message. I don't know if he can help out with the NIL part of that equation, but maybe some work to do with Messiah Hampton. And then let's wrap it up here from the official visit takeaways. A trio of cornerbacks who've commanded attention during the 2026 cycle. Kari Adams, Dorian Barnes, Cameron Hamel from different parts of America. Talk us through where they traveled from and what they were thinking, as far as we know, when they left campus.
Corey Adams is a very familiar name for Penn State fans. Being from Maryland, Towson area, loyal to Blake Field standout, number 3 corner in the nation. He's been a frequent visitor throughout his recruitment. Penn State really, really helped its up there over the weekend. I think for me, and Adams got a crystal ball prediction from our 24/7 sports team in favor of Penn State. I think for me with Corey Adams, this was the first time, based on the feedback and some of the conversations I had coming out of this OV weekend, where I sat down on my laptop and thought, do I want to pop in a crystal ball pick? I gave that some pretty serious consideration. I hadn't done that with Corey Adams up until this point. That being said, I do want to see how some of these other OVs play out before I go there. He has South Carolina on his schedule. Then the Gamecocks are legit in this recruitment, but I'm keeping more of an eye on Notre Dame and Oregon. Those are his final 2 OVs. Those are going to loom really, really large for Corey Adams. Michigan is still in the mix as well. Not quite sure what's going on there in terms of having an official visit set with the Wolverines. We'll see what comes about. But Penn State just continued to help itself with Corey Adams. It did so when it got him back to campus towards the end of spring practice. He saw his fit in Jim Knowles' defense, and James Franklin made it clear to him during his time on campus over the weekend. They've been all in for a while, and it's been consistent, and they're not going to stop until they get him in the class. So Penn State's doing a lot of good things in that recruitment. Dorian Barney, he's a Pennsylvania native, 4-star corner playing his high school ball down in Georgia. Another guy that I think Penn State made a really good impression on. Around this time last month, about a month and a half ago, this one, if you asked me about it, I would have told you Penn State's not going to get it done. It's going to go in a different direction. I think the narrative has completely changed. I think that Penn State has inserted itself really into the thick of this recruitment. A lot of it had to do with getting Barney to campus. Once they got him to campus and during spring practice and locked in that official visit, the entire narrative and the dynamic changed, and the tide started to turn. It was crucial for Dorian Barney to not just get to town and spend more time with Terry Smith, but really see everything about Penn State, because Penn State had gone in-home with Barney during previous contact periods, and it went well, but again, he still had to get back to his roots as a Pennsylvania native, see some more Penn State, see if he could really see himself fitting in State College on and off the field, and it worked out, I think, in Penn State's favor with Barney over the weekend. So that's another one where I'm not going the crystal ball yet, but it's one I'm considering. Penn State, the arrow is pointing up for the Nittany Lions in that recruitment. There's no doubt about it. And then with Hamill, he's interesting because he's an Arizona kid, but he's got Midwest roots. He's from Indiana. He used to be high school teammates with Jaquarian Guilford, the former Penn State commit at wide receiver. And I think the Nittany Lions, again, made a really strong impression there. He's got a top 4, and it's kind of scattered across the nation, so I don't think geography is going to play a real part in where he lands at the next level. I also think the first 2 we touched on, Adams and Barney, they're higher in the pecking order. It's a crowded cornerback board, and there's a lot of movement going on right there. But Hamill's very much in the conversation. He's a really, really good player. He's been a stock riser in the 26 class, and Penn State had its chance. I think they took their swing, and they hit quite nicely with him. But he's still got trips to make.
While we're talking cornerbacks, there is one on Penn State's radar who intends to announce his college commitment on Thursday afternoon. It's Jaziel Hart out of North Cross School down in Roanoke, Virginia. Penn State is one of his finalists. We are now under the 48-hour mark to when he lets the world know where he'll be attending college. And Tyler, we just went over the fact that Penn State has a lot of irons in the fire at cornerback. Terry Smith always aiming high to add to that position room. How much of a factor is Penn State with Hart, and could this be the next addition to a fast-growing 2026 class?
Yeah, it's definitely a possibility. I have a crystal ball prediction in favor of the Nittany Lions, and I think they're in the best spot to get this one done ahead of the Thursday announcement. Jaziel Hart is essentially why I said what I said about the cornerback board being interesting and, it being fluid in terms of numbers, because Julian Peterson is committed as well. I think people forget that. He's been committed for so long. Going back to the winter now, he's kind of the forgotten guy, but he's on board, and Penn State likes him a lot. So Hart would be another addition at corner for Terry Smith if Penn State was to get this one done. Michigan's heavily in the mix. This one, for me, it's really a Penn State-Michigan deal. That's been the case for a little while. Michigan's been right there along with Penn State throughout this recruitment. Notre Dame, Tennessee, Virginia Tech as well. Virginia Tech has also offered Hart a 2-way opportunity, which is unique in this recruitment. I believe Tech is the only program that has gone out and offered that opportunity to be a 2-way standout. But I like where Penn State is at going into this announcement. I like the Nittany Lions to get this one done when it's all said and done. And I think what Penn State accomplished with Hart when he was back on campus just before the spring game is a big reason why this went from a neck and neck race between the Nittany Lions and Michigan to Penn State inching out a little bit in front of his announcement. The relationships are really good. He loves the staff, and he really likes what he could accomplish potentially in Penn State's defense.
If Hart does indeed pick Penn State, we'll dive into that topic on the next episode of the podcast. We'll get Tyler back on that. But to finish out here, if Penn State is the pick for Hart here this week, what does that do to the cornerback board? Because there are so many moving pieces there. It seems like Penn State is at the top or near the top for some elite level talent. So what do we need to know about the immediate ramifications if Hart is the addition on Thursday?
Still have room for a couple more additions, and it just comes back to the level of trust James Franklin has in Terry Smith. It is shown cycle in and cycle out. Terry Smith is going to have as much room to maneuver and operate as he desires. So if he wants to welcome a guy into the class and it makes sense for Penn State, if that kid wants to jump and commit, it's going to happen. That's the kind of point where Smith has reached. I mean, cycle in, cycle out. The results have kind of spoke for themselves in that regard. So you've definitely still got room for a couple more additions. You would be at 2 if Hart were to commit, teamed up with Peterson. But there's still plenty of room there to add guys like Kari Adams, Dorian Barney, and some of the other corners you're going to visit later on in June as well.
Well, there's content on every single one of these recruits that we've discussed today over at Lions247.com. We'll have more coming your way. We're still working our way through some camp video to put together highlight pieces. There's a whole gallery from that Elite 11 event. I have a story breaking down everything I heard from Chad Henne, who knows a thing or two about playing quarterback and what he saw from Falzone and Huhn throughout the day on Sunday. And, of course, as things continue to develop between this past official visit weekend and the next one for Penn State, Tyler Calvaruso, Brian Doan, and our recruiting coverage team at 247 Sports will have you covered at Lions247.com. Tyler, always appreciate you bringing us the good stuff on recruiting. Enjoyed sharing the camp field with you again on Sunday, and excited to see your coverage from Jersey as the camp circuit continues next weekend.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting out there, man. It was great being back with you guys. It's going to be a fun camp season. It's going to be a fun official visit season as well. So I'm looking forward to all of it.
All right. You can find Tyler's coverage and all of our coverage at Lions247.com. A couple times a week, we get together, sit down, put together some segments here on the podcast, and bring that to wherever you find your episodes. And, of course, at YouTube, if you want to watch video of each and every one of these shows. For now, stepping aside, I am Tyler Downey on behalf of Tyler Calvaruso and Daniel Gallen. Thanks, as always, for listening or watching the Lions247 podcast.